Well, hey, what's up, everybody? Good afternoon. Michael Beck coming in here. And today we're going to talk about sex addiction. And some of you might be thinking to yourselves, can we not talk about sex addiction, please? And I want to share some interesting statistics for you. And in the book Painting with Ashes, I kind of delved into that world a little bit. And it's interesting if a pastor stands before a congregation and says, "I'm a recovering alcoholic," people are typically comfortable with that, right? Okay, way to go, pastor. Good. Hey, please check in. Let me know who you are, where you're joining from, how you're doing today. Would love to see that. Always awesome to have friends join from all over. Yeah, if a pastor shares, "Hey, I'm a recovering drug addict," people are even, okay, that's a little weird. Most people, all right, most people, not everybody. Some people are like, "Yeah, I think I'll go find another church now," right? But for the most part, there's not the kind of stigma that's associated with that. Hey, Gene. But if a pastor stands before a congregation and says, "Hey, I'm a recovering sex addict," boy, there's a whole kind of different stigma that goes with that, isn't there? You know, one of the things I pointed out in Painting with Ashes is what's been called the silent epidemic, which the untold epidemic. There's a lot out in the news today and yesterday about reaching this 100,000 number of deaths, mostly attributed to fentanyl overdose. And so I kind of tried to give a little bit of a glimpse into that world, a world that I was a part of myself, and to think about what can churches really do in the midst of this kind of a crisis. Another thing I touched on in the book, and I've heard a lot of feedback, both good and bad, about this, was sex addiction. And I wanted to dive into this and really, ask the question, what can churches and Christians do to heal this wound that is sex addiction and the dark pain that it causes and trauma. So just a couple statistics here. I noted some of these in the book for those of you that have the book, but these statistics come out of Barna and a site called Covenant Eyes. And so some of the guys that I work with in recovery use the Covenant Eyes software, which is an accountability software that helps people stay off pornographic sites and alerts your sponsor, your mentor, when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. So here's the numbers. 40 million Americans regularly visit porn sites. Around 42 million porn websites, 370 million pages of porn. The porn industry's annual revenue is more than the NFL, the NBA, the MLB combined. 47% of families in the United States reported pornography as a problem in their home. 11% is the average age a child is first exposed to porn. And 94% of children have viewed pornography by the age of 14. 56% of Americans with divorces involve some kind of pornographic addiction or struggle. 70% of Christian youth pastors report that they counsel youth with that issue. 68% of church-going men and over 50% of pastors view porn on a regular basis. So you might say, well, what's the difference? How does it hold up for somebody who's a Christian and somebody who's not, with the struggle with pornography or sex addiction in general? And the answer to that question is essentially there's no difference. That whether somebody goes to church or refers to themselves as a Christian or not, or whether they're completely not a Christian or don't profess Christianity as their faith, if you took a group of people, some who go to church, some who don't go to church, it doesn't matter a lick. In fact, if you think of it like this, if you know 10 pastors, most likely 5 of the 10 pastors are struggling with some kind of pornographic or sex addiction. right? I know it's troubling to think of this. Um, and I can kind of go on and on. There's a massive increase among women with pornography. 30%, 33% of women age 25 and under search for pornography once per month. And there's a lot more kind of troubling statistics that could go on and on and on. But the thing that I want to, kind of plug into here is what do we do about it? What can Christians and what can the church do about it? And this is an uncomfortable topic, and I've got some pushback about my book for, putting that out there. And so I do have some thoughts as being somebody who is an alcoholic and a drug addict who's been in recovery now, and who's been in recovery from sex addiction for over a decade and working a program in that department. I have a couple thoughts about it. And I think for the most part, the church's posture with it, and I'm making a generalization statement here, has been to do nothing, to really not even acknowledge the problem, even when we know that 50% of pastors are having this struggle themselves, and congregations, over half the people in your congregation are having this struggle with some kind of sex addiction. Now, you might say, well, pornography, it's not illegal. What harm does it really do? That's somebody's sex life. That's between them or whatever. But have you really thought about the cascade of consequences that come out of viewing pornography? The objectification of people made in the image of God, that basically are used and disposed of as an image for gratification. How the pornographic industry also fuels all kind of other sex trafficking and sex trade type things. And so all this dark underworld of the pornographic industry is connected to things that are very much illegal, including prostitution, including objectification of vulnerable persons and children. And so it's not just a personal issue between that person and God. It is a issue that has consequences that kind of cascade out in many different ways. And so what does the church do about this? Well, in the book, I try to really give a Wesleyan theology for recovery, and that 12-step recovery is a kind of solution for this. In sexual addiction programs, we work the same 12 steps that are used for Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and Codependence Anonymous and all those different fellowships, defining sobriety in those groups with sexual addiction as MAP, masturbation, adultery, pornography. So that's the recovery process, going through, journeying through healing from those things. And so there's a very similar idea: get together in a group, talk about this, work the steps, have a sponsor. And I kind of lay all that out in the book. And so really basic level thing that churches can do, for one, is talk about the problem, right? Is it going to ruffle feathers? Are people going to get upset? Are people going to say, I don't come to church for that? Yes. Does that mean that we should not talk about it? No, right? If there's something that we know is causing harm and brokenness in people's lives, then it is our responsibility as followers of Jesus to call those things out and to offer healing communities. So one, you don't have to do a whole sermon series on sex addiction, right? But you can create a safe and vulnerable place for people to kind of process that. So in the book, I talk about healing communities that have really these three kind of values, if you will, that they're safe, accessible, and real. Safe, accessible, and real. And when I talk about safety, that's a community of healing and not harm. That's a community where everybody's welcome. It's an all-inclusive community where there's not a wall in a gated community kind of situation, but it's an open community where everybody can come. That it's accessible, that we speak a language that people understand that we're not speaking Christianese and speaking over people's heads, and that it's real, that we create a place where people can process their grief, their traumas, and their current struggles in an unfiltered way. And so when you look at the psalmist, for instance, who's crying out to God and saying, I wet my bed with tears, and oh God, where are you? And why aren't you with me in the middle of this? And these kind of heart cry things that we see in Lamentations and the psalmist, and people coming together in community and expressing those things, right? And so that could look like starting a recovery ministry in your church, of which one aspect could be sex addiction, right? That we can create safe place for that. Welcoming existing sexual addiction recovery groups to come and host those groups at our churches or our facilities or whatever, inviting those fellowships to come and be a part of our church. We could help people understand what I try to lay out in the book is a theology of empowered weakness, that every single one of us is in recovery from something. Maybe your thing's not sex addiction. Maybe your thing's not drug addiction or alcoholism. Maybe it's shopping addiction, overeating, negative attitudes, judgmentalism, those things, right? Thank you, Ruben. That we create a space where people can actually, bring those things and say, hey, I'm wounded. Now, I think this is where the rub happens. This requires the so-called leaders of the community to be transparent about their own struggles, about their own, walk and story and the things that we've overcome. And when we can, as Henry Nouwen talks about in The Wounded Healer, when we take the bandages off our wounds and say, here's my wounds and here's what Jesus has healed me from and is healing me from, then that opens up other people to say, okay, it's okay that I'm having this struggle. It's okay that I have this problem. And this is a safe place for me to talk about that. Now, you can imagine like church Bible studies and such, somebody saying, hey, I think I'm struggling with sex addiction, right? Probably not going to be received real well. And so part of the magic of what I call church in the wild or fresh expressions or new Christian communities, churches that happen with people, maybe outside, in most cases, the traditional and inherited church space, there's a much more openness in those kind of spaces. I like to call it an ecosystem of grace where people can really kind of bring that stuff and find healing from it. That's the only way, actually. And there's a biblical process that I kind of lay out in Painting with Ashes about one of the things we say in the recovery community is we're only as sick as our secrets, right? And so unconfessed sin or wound or trauma, brokenness, however you want to define that, when we hold on to that and it kind of simmers inside of us, it affects every relationship, including our relationship with God, including our most intimate relationships. And so there's power in what the steps lay out of acknowledging our powerlessness, coming to believe that there's a power greater than us that can restore us to sanity. I know that power is Jesus of Nazareth. Then making a decision to turn it over and then inventorying those things and then confessing them to another person and then asking God to remove those defects of character. So there's this whole kind of process that's laid out in the recovery community. And why is it that whether you're a Christian or you're not a Christian, there's absolutely no difference between those populations of if somebody's struggling with pornography addiction or sex addiction of some kind? Well, because I think Christianity, or church as we know it today, inoculates us just enough to actually have a real and living faith in Jesus Christ. And what I mean by that is we can go into a congregation, we can hide, and we can receive our religious goods and services from the professional pastor, and we pay our tithes and we do the things we're supposed to do, right? We can do all of that and never go through this journey I just described that's laid out in the steps, where we have to get honest with ourselves. We have to acknowledge what Jesus called our poverty of spirit, where we can come to the truth that Paul does, that we all have a thorn in the flesh, and that God's grace is made perfect in our weakness, that your weakness really is your superpower. And really, I call this the Jesus cure. Like alcoholics or drug addicts come to my church and tell me maybe they think they have a problem with alcohol. And I say, well, I'm glad you're coming to church, but meet me at the noon meeting tomorrow so you can get some real healing and do some real work on that, right? Because the church as we know it can inoculate people just enough. If you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, you need to go to meetings. 14 years later, I'm still going to meetings, y'all, and love the meetings and love being with the people in those meetings. In fact, when I hang out with normal pastors, I get freaked out. For one, no offense to all my pastor friends who've never had a speeding ticket or something like that, right? And they're like sanctified and holy, and I just don't get it. That's not me. I've been on this other journey, right? But when church people are getting cranky and wild things are happening and all the stress and stuff, what community do pastors go to and say, hey, my week sucks. I'm really struggling with this. I'm having these thoughts. So I have that kind of a community in Alcoholics Anonymous and different sexual addiction recovery programs. But what about the so-called normie who has no kind of community like that? Does the church provide that? In most cases, no, the church does not provide that. But we can create those kind of communities. We can create alongside in our existing congregations these little communities that are safe, accessible, and real, where we can open up and we can invite people into that healing journey where the only thing you can cure is a ham, I say in the book. Jesus has not cured me. Right? And this is the same of sex addiction, alcoholism, codependency, drug addiction, whatever your ism is, right? Jesus has not cured me. He's healed me one day at a time by the grace of God, right? And he gives me that healing and that treatment every day, that I lean in and depend on that treatment and that healing that can only flow from him. So I'm not cured, but I'm healed just for today as I continue to participate in that. And now it's been a lot of thousands of one days at a time now. I can look back and go, oh man, I think I've been clean and sober and healing from sex addiction and alcoholism and drug addiction longer than I was actually all jacked up. And that's a good thing. And that's something to celebrate, but also realizing, but it's still a one day at a time deal, right? Jesus says every day has enough trouble of its own. Don't go worrying about tomorrow, but live your life just for today. Live your life in that utter place of empowered weakness, where we're trusting in God's grace and leaning into our relationship. And friends, that is actually the only cure. It's the only way that we can find healing from sex addiction, alcoholism, drug addiction, whatever that ism is. There's only one. This is the crazy thing about alcoholism, and I'll shut up. I know I've gone a little bit over and I get passionate about this topic, but scientists and psychiatrists, and they've done all this work. And I love in the Alcoholics Anonymous book, big book, Dr. Silkworth, who worked with alcoholism and had pretty much called it a hopeless condition. And then he met Bill W. And but he says, the only unless this person have an entire psychic change in a spiritual awakening, there is no recovery, right? You can't take a pill for it. You can't, go see a shrink enough and it'll be gone. You can't, that doesn't work. The solution is spiritual in nature. It's a relationship with God. And that's the only way that we can find healing from these things. And if anywhere in the world is supposed to be the place where people can come and say, hey, I'm struggling with sex addiction, like the other 80% of males or whatever those statistics I just read off, or the 50+% of pastors who struggle with pornography. I'm struggling with that. I need healing. I need a community. I need God's grace. If there's anywhere in the world where people should be able to come and find that kind of transparency and that kind of healing and that kind of wholeness, it's the church. And the reason why there's no difference between somebody who says they're a Christian and somebody who doesn't, how much they view pornography, is because we failed to really create that kind of church, the kind of church that Jesus envisioned, communities of healing, communities where we can find God's love and our true selves, and we can go on a journey of grace. And it's not about continuing and staying stuck and in that. It's a transformative journey that happens one day at a time. And the church is supposed to be that place that's safe and accessible and real, and the place where we can find that kind of healing. So, hey, real quick, I know I went way over and I didn't invite any time for questions, but if anybody has a quick question you want to throw into the chat, as you're doing that, I'll make an exciting announcement about all of the Fresh Expressions resources at Cokesbury right now. There's a discount on those. So if you Expressions in the Cokesbury Library, there's a discount. I've got a new book coming out called Fresh Expressions of the Rural Church with my friend Tyler Kleberger. That's coming out just over the summer here. And if you want to pre-order that, there's a code that you can use, Fresh15, Fresh15, and I'll put that in the comment section here. But that'll get you a 15% or 20% discount on any Fresh Expressions resources that are in the Cokesbury bookstore online. So if you go in there and look at Fresh Expression, the Digital Age, Field Guide to Fresh Expressions, and this new book is coming out, Fresh Expression of the Rural Church, you can get a discount on those. So if there's no questions coming in here, I hope this encouraged you. I hope this is not like a bummer alert, like or any kind of condemnation. I hope you're not feeling that for me. I'm just somebody who is also on the journey of healing, struggling along one day at a time, trusting in Jesus. And if you feel like you need to talk deeper about this, reach out to me. And every week I try to do these live streams where I take something out of the book and just talk about it. I want you as an author, I want you to have access and relationship with me. I don't want to just throw products out into the world, but I want to know who you are and have relationships and talk about these ideas and learn from one another. So thank you everybody for joining in this stream. I will be popping back in at some point next week. And I'm grateful for all of you, and may you continue to paint with ashes. May you continue to find empowered weakness, that God's grace is made perfect in our powerlessness, and that our healing, every single one of us, comes one day at a time. And may we create in the church communities where no matter what people's struggle is or what their wounds they carry or their trauma, may we create churches that are safe, accessible, and real, where people can find true and lasting and eternal healing. Can I get an amen on that? Amen, everybody. So thank you for tuning in. Y'all have a great day, and I'll see you next week. God bless. See you.